Hi friends, welcome back with new amazing video from Top Movies Recap. Today I'm going to recap a 2000 romance and drama film titled Malena. Spoiler warning, watch out and take care. The film begins with a 13-year-old boy called Renato receiving his new bike, which he rides back to his buddies. They congratulate him on his new bike when he arrives, then sit glued to the side of the road watching Malena walk down the street. When Malena, their Latin teacher's daughter, comes by on her bike, the group flees, trying to keep their eyes on her. Renato is smitten by her beauty and keeps his attention fixated on her whenever the opportunity presents itself. The next day, the guys get together on a cliff to evaluate their manhood while discussing Malena. Renato's friend brings up a conversation he had with Malena, which upsets him and prompts him to mock him. The next day, Renato skips school and rides to Malena's house, where he daydreams about her. Yelling at him and requesting cigarettes, his daydream is cut short. However, he sees Malena's house with the door shut. His father is unhappy with him at home because he skipped school, was bullied by his pals, and had his clothes altered. Renato sneaks out of his room later that night and returns to Malena's house. He climbs a tree and looks inside the house through a hole in the window where he finds Malena lying on a couch. He follows Malena about the house, listening to the radio until he notices a photograph of her husband, Nino Scordia. The next day, the men in a barbershop discuss about Malena and how she came to their town through Nino, who is currently fighting in the war. Renato protests to the barber when his number is called, wondering why he can't sit in the adult's chair. The barber, of course, just informs him that he is still too young. Renato returns to Malena's house after his haircut, spying on her with a telescope and watching her dry herself in her garden. Renato later goes up to the window and peers through a hole to see her stitch. Renato is taken aback when he notices Malena's clothing sagging and exposing a bit of her body as he watches. She then begins to dance with a picture of Nina while a song plays in the background until it is time for her to return to her room. Renato goes to a music store the next morning and requests a record of the song that is currently playing at Malena's home. He states there that he doesn't listen to the gossip in town and that he is the only man for her after her marriage. Renato rejoins his companions in their search for Malena. He then makes up an excuse to leave his friends before catching up to Malena. When he sees her walking down the street, the guys in the town are watching her. The men greet her, but she continues on her way, her gaze fixed on the ground. The other men are envious as one man greets her by repeatedly kissing her hand. Malena then hurriedly averts her gaze from Lieutenant Kadai, who is standing near a balcony. As she approaches her destination, Renato watches her snatching a key for a door leading to an apartment. When some of the students in Latin class make obscene jokes about Malena, Renato is outraged. Renato waits for the pupils to walk down the stairs so he can spit on them. Renato subsequently visits a mechanic to have his bike repaired, where he sees Malena for the second time. Renato could only watch her while the town's women gossiped amongst themselves, disgusted by Malena's presence. One of the women compares Gina, a local escort, to her. As Malena returns to her flat, Renato continues to trail her. He then scales a nearby gate to see who Malena is staring at, which turns out to be her father. Renato is at home later that night, stroking his hands while listening to music and thinking about Malena. During their morning workouts the next day, one of Renato's friends informs him that Nino Scordia has died in battle. Renato goes to Nino's memorial funeral afterwards. During the memorial, two young ladies become euphoric as they gaze at Lieutenant Kadai, exclaiming how attractive he is. Renato goes to Professor Bonsignore's apartment after leaving and finds Malena in bed, sobbing over her husband's death. Before Malena hugs him, Renato imagines himself by Malena's side, soothing and telling her that he will be there for her. Later, during Nino's funeral procession, Malena dresses up as the Virgin Mary, looking horrible, while Renato looks on from below, concerned. Renato walks over to Malena's house and steals a pair of her panties before sprinting back to his bike and riding home. Renato returns to his room and touches himself again, this time keeping Malena's underpants near to him and fantasizing about the two of them till he falls asleep. Renato's father enters Renato's room the next day to discover him still sleeping with his underwear hanging over his head. Renato's father has a fit and tells him he's ashamed of him, while the rest of Renato's family notices. Renato's father scolds him and locks him in his room, while Renato's mother burns the underwear while crying in shame. Renato's mother is worried about her kid, who hasn't eaten in 3 days. Then she expresses her displeasure with the fascist treatment of them. Renato is visited by a doctor the next day to check on him, and he notifies his family that he needs to go. Renato then rides his bike back to Malena's house, where the streets are now bustling with more people and automobiles. When he arrives, he notices Lieutenant Kadai and several men staring at Malena's house. As the day progresses, Renato is in the middle of a report in class when a man enters and hands Professor Bonsignore a letter. Someone mentioned in the letter that the professor is dishonest since his daughter has been sleeping with the entire community. The professor, heartbroken, departs his class, leaving the students to chat about the letter. Renato is insulted, so he fights one of the pupils while pretending to be a gladiator for Malena. Renato returns to Malena's house late at night and discovers Lieutenant Kadite inside, conversing with her. Renato is enraged by what he witnesses, particularly when Lieutenant Kadite kisses Malena farewell. Meanwhile, Renato can only watch the cops arrest the two idiots with a puzzled expression on his face. The next day, the townfolk talk about what happened the night before, debating on who was to blame. Many people are shocked that Malena is rumored to have two boyfriends, and they point out that the professor has already resigned in disgrace. People further suggest that Malena should be prosecuted for seducing a married guy. Renato, who is standing on the sidelines, notices that the professor has given up on his daughter and gives Malena a worrisome glance. Later, Malena goes to attorney Sensual's office to seek legal advice before going to court. Renato stands outside the packed courtroom, watching Malena's trial unfold. Malena's relationship with the dentist is then investigated by the court. Dr. Cusimano only came to see Malena once to give her father medicine, according to Malena, and he lied about being her fiancé. Malena says their connection isn't a legal issue when the judge asks about Lieutenant Kadite. The judge, on the other hand, informs Malena that Lieutenant Kadite was interrogated as part of a court investigation before being sent to Albania as a result of the incident. When the court is adjourned, Malena and attorney Sensual return to her home and dance, while Renato looks out the window. Sensual talks with Malena for a bit before making his move on her, assuring her that the only payment he wants is Malena herself. Renato stands there in terror as Sensual tries to seduce Malena into loving him. Renato moves to another limb in an attempt to obtain a better view, but it breaks, causing the boy to fall. Renato returns to the church the next day and speaks with the saint, assuring him that he forgives Malena for what she did the night before. He then informs the saint that he failed to defend Malena, and in order to atone for his failure, he breaks the saint's arm. Renato thinks about Malena in class and writes her a letter in which he proclaims his love for her and believes that she is unworthy of a man like Sensual. Renato then imagines himself with Malena, but his imagination is cut short when his professor chastises him for acting inappropriately. Renato storms out of class, stomping on a statue and causing it to fall off and break. Renato then goes to the tailor with his family. While Renato is dressed in long pants, his father listens to the radio, where he hears about the ongoing Allied bombs. Renato spies on Sensual, who is visiting his mother after leaving the tailor. When Renato's mother smacks him and screams at him in disdain of Malena, Renato observes and laughs. Renato then pursues Sensual and discovers him with a teary-eyed Malena, where they conclude their romance. Renato is relieved and he heads straight to the barbershop. Renato then continues to follow Malena around the streets as she is harassed by men. She walks through an alley to avoid being seen and she suddenly stops down. Renato dashes to one of the bombed-out buildings where soldiers rescue Professor Bonsignore's body from the rubble. Malena soon joins the funeral procession for the professor, along with her father's students. Dozens of men surround Malena as he is laid to rest, giving their condolences. Renato too forms a line, but is interrupted by an older man and eventually moves away when he notices additional men talking in Malena's ear. Malena returns home after the funeral and begins cutting her hair and doing the dishes, while Renato stands hopelessly by the door. Renato is startled as an automobile unexpectedly approaches Malena's residence. Salvador, Antonio's friend, exits the vehicle and approaches Malena's door. She invites him inside after meeting him. Renato, who is seeing Salvador push himself on Malena through the hole in the window, is in tears. While Salvador enjoys himself, Malena stares coldly at the ceiling, prompting Renato to return home in a rage. The next day, more Germans arrive in town, and Renato goes for a walk through the streets before seeing Malena. Malena now has red hair and is dressed in revealing clothes, which utterly transfixes him. Renato listens and watches the next morning as the men at the barbershop notice Malena's new blonde hair. She's there with the escort Gina, and the two of them are serving the Germans. Renato imagines the atrocities Malena and Gina do against the Germans at their hotel as a result of this before nodding out. They take him to a seaside cottage for certain ceremonies after that. Outside, Renato's father screams his disgust, believing that all Renato needs to do is sleep with a woman to be free of his folly. Renato's father brings him to a brothel after the rites, where he selects a dark-haired escort after great consideration. The two then go upstairs to a room and start hooking up. Later, the Allies arrive in town, removing German influence from Castelcudo. Renato ecstatically rides one of the American jeeps as he celebrates. A mob of women assaults a building, yanking Malena out. The women begin thrashing her on the streets, ripping her clothes off and humiliating her in front of others. Renato was terrified and unable to stop the women from cutting her hair and cursing her for having affairs with their husbands. Malena is left powerless and bloodied once they've finished, wailing in agony and shame before the women send her out of town. Renato travels to the railway station shortly after and sees Malena boarding. Renato watches her walk away without ever speaking to the lady he adores. Renato sits and stares at the record of the song he first heard in Malena's house on the cliff where he and his friends hang out, before tossing it down the cliff and into the sea. Back in town, a car pulls to a halt, allowing a man to exit the vehicle. People identify him as he walks down the street, revealing him to be Nino Scordia, Malena's purportedly dead husband. Renato follows Nino inside his previous home where he is surprised to find refugees and learn that his wife has vanished. Renato continues to trail Nino as he enters an American office. He tells Renato what occurred to him there. Nino then begs the Americans to assist him in locating his wife. Renato assists a broken-down Nino in getting back on his feet, and the man returns home. Nino is sitting by the bed, lost in thought, when Renato unexpectedly drops a note next to him. Nino tries to track down the boy, but he eventually reads the letter and discovers that Malena has always been loyal to him and that she has moved to Messina. Nino boards a train to Messina with his discovery while Renato looks on. The locals could only look on in astonishment as the pair walk back to their home, ignoring everyone. Following that, Malena wanders around the market where a dozen people gaze at her and everyone makes comments as she passes from store to store. Two women stare at her and Malena returns their stares before greeting them. They return the greeting and the folks in the market resume their normal behavior, going about their daily routines. Renato rides up on his bike after Malena finishes shopping, and he watches the object of his long-standing infatuation walk home. Some of the tomatoes fall out of her bag on the way home. Renato assists her, brushing his hand across hers as he returns the tomato to her bag. Finally, he addresses her and wishes her well. Malena simply nods and goes away. As Renato watches her go away, he reflects on how, despite his innumerable encounters with women, Malena is the only one he will always remember. We hope you enjoyed our video from today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to receive notifications of new and interesting videos.